really is a privilege to be here today, and I'm really excited. Today I'm sharing on a topic called living in limbo. So I want to start off by giving you a mental picture. A number of years ago, my dad and I went to Mauritius on a holiday, and we were snorkeling for the first time in the boat, out at sea, and I was already climbing down the ladder, and the next minute I looked to the side of the boat, and there were all these guys flipping out the side of the boat, and I was like, "Gee, that's awesome." I looked the other end, and there's my dad back flipping off the side, and I was like, if he can do this, I can do this. So with all my might, I propelled myself backwards, only to come bashing, crashing down against the side of the boat because my foot, fin, flipper, whatever, see how little I know, was caught in the ladder. So there I was, suspended between heaven and hell in my mind, dangling from the side of the ocean, head swaying in the sea, screaming blue murder, but to no avail because everybody's heads were down in the water snorkeling. I tried to catch my dad's attention, and at one stage I actually saw him look up, like, where is she? Even though I'd been hanging upside down for quite a while at this point, I saw him make eye contact with me and put his head down and carry on snorkeling. And I was like, you're kidding me. My hour of need, and I'm abandoned by my own father. But this really set the tone for the rest of the holiday. I was like a magnet for mishaps. I could tell you stories of just what can go wrong. And most of the holiday, my dad was spent just like, I don't know her. But the picture I want you to have in your mind is me dangling from the side of the boat. I wasn't in the boat and I wasn't in the water. I was somewhere in between. And that's what limbo is. It's that place of uncertainty where you're not sure what the outcome is, where it's unclear where you're going, that transition period, that intermediate stage. And some big examples of limbo in our life can be between a death and a funeral, between a separation and a divorce, or between a pregnancy and a birth, between receiving God's promise and seeing his fulfillment. And for me, I really started thinking about this last year, May. My dad, who is my absolute hero, am I echoing when I move? Must I not move? My dad, who is my hero, I'm positive he's actually an undercover superhero who never complains about anything. And last year, May, he started saying that he's not feeling well, that he's feeling sick and he's got pain. So it was in and out of hospital, and it was every test, and it was biopsies and scans and blood tests and MRIs and PET scans, CAT scans, and it was just non-stop for 3 months because they couldn't find what was wrong. And eventually by August, they discovered that it was cancer. But they didn't know what type of cancer it was, so they actually couldn't treat it. And it took another 2.5 months of constant tests before they discovered that it was pancreatic cancer. Sadly, at this time, it was too late. It had spread everywhere. It was stage 4. It was terminal, and he was given a few weeks or months to live. I then lost him at the end of the year, the 29th of December last year. But during this time, I really started crying out to God and saying, how do I live here? My heart is just, my stomach's in this knot, and I'm in this place of absolute panic and anxiety. How do I honor you in this place? How do I glorify you? How do I learn to rejoice always? So today I really just want to share some thoughts with you on that journey. So we all go through periods of limbo, whether we like it or not. Some are shorter periods and some are longer, as in the case of like David and Joseph in the Bible. But the challenge is to prepare for it and not to fear it, because fear leads to paralysis, which can cause us to get stuck in limbo for many years. So how do we live in limbo? If you can turn in your Bibles with me to Philippians 4, verse 10 to 13. And so here Paul is writing to the church in Philippi. Hiya. Is that working? No. Yes. Okay, Paul is writing to the church in Philippi. He's in prison at the time. It's thought that he's in Rome around AD 61, and it's really a letter of thank you for a financial gift that they'd given him. So it says, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. So just to emphasize there, firstly, Paul says, I learned. So contentment is not this thing of, da-da-da-da, you are content. You actually learn contentment. And how did he learn it? He learned it through circumstances, through being in plenty and through being in need, through being in want. And I love that he calls it the secret of contentment. It's like this quest, this mystery pursuit of contentment. And with Paul, there are no grey areas. It's in any and every situation. So the standout feature for me in the book of Philippians is really Paul's response to what he was going through. He somehow doesn't allow his circumstances to dictate his sense of well-being. Instead, his sense of well-being is derived from his sense of destiny, that very thing, the reason that God had gripped his heart, his relationship with God. He sees his life, and I don't know how many of us can say that, from God's point of view, where he doesn't rely on circumstances to produce contentment. And we see this modeled in Jesus, when Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. So we don't seek those things because those things can't bring fulfillment. They can't satisfy. They can't bring contentment. Only seeking his kingdom brings that. And as we seek him, all these other things are added. So what is contentment? Contentment is the state of being mentally or emotionally satisfied with things as they are. And I don't know how many of us can say right now that we are satisfied with what we have, who we are, and where we are going this moment. You know, contentment seems to be this rare and elusive thing. There's a story of a pilot, and he's flying over a lake, and he says to his co-pilot, and he says, you know, when I was a little boy, I would be in my rowboat on that lake, and I would watch all the planes flying overhead, and I would think, I just wish I could fly one of them. He says, now I'm the pilot in the plane, and he says, and all I wish is that I was the little boy in the rowboat. So it's strange that how we get there, those very things that we strive for when we get there, they actually don't satisfy, and we start striving for more. I think for me especially, I always live in the when I get a new job, when I can buy a home, when I get married, when I have children, or normally in my case, when I can pay my bond. Those are usually the big things for me. But we're always living in the future, and we see this discontentment in society, like the high level of consumer spending. We're always buying things we can't afford, thinking that that next thing can satisfy us. Or our high rate of mobility. We're moving towns or cities or jobs or churches or countries, or high rate of divorce. We need to get out of the land of I call it, where we want bigger and better, and we want to be smarter and prettier and thinner and all these things. These things are not necessarily bad in themselves. The problem is when they become our end goal, when they become the focus, because we look to fill the void in our lives with money or possessions or relationships or people, but we only end up wanting more. It's like drinking seawater. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. And I'm reminded of Jesus when he talks to the Samaritan woman at the well, and he says, the water that I give you is life-giving, and you will never thirst again. And for me, that is just the greatest problem, I promise. I just want to encourage you today that as we seek after these things, that they should never be the end goal. They should never be the focus, because they can never satisfy. Our satisfaction only comes in tasting and seeing that the Lord is good, and once we drink from him, we find true fulfillment and satisfaction. Okay, true contentment, what is that? It's a skill, it's a discipline, it's an attitude of the heart. When we're faced with situations, we really have two possible choices. Either we maintain our stuck position that we're in through complaining and grumbling and fear and all those things. In other words, we're reactive and we allow our situation to dictate our response. Or we can purposefully and deliberately lean into the possibilities that God has for us in the present. In other words, we are proactive. We actually choose our actions based on our convictions, based on our discipline and our heart, our relationship with God. So everything in life is a choice. 5 degrees north and south of the equator, which I did not know this, there is what we call the doldrums. So it's a place where there is no wind, and there would be, therefore, it was windless waters. There's no wind to actually propel the sailing ships through. So what the sailing ships would do is they would have rowboats on board. They would let these down, attach it to the ship, and the sailors would literally row them through the doldrums. If they didn't and they got stuck there and stranded out at sea, it would result in sure death for everyone on board. And I know for us, sometimes where we feel that we're in that stuck position, we're in limbo, and there's no wind that's moving us forward. In fact, we feel like we're adrift all alone on some ocean. We must keep rowing. We must keep forward momentum. And how do we do this? We do this by deliberately and actually leaning into God and allowing Him to work even in that position where we are. And that creates forward momentum. So it's a choice. True contentment is an inner sense of rest or peace that comes from being right with God and knowing that He is in control of all things that happens to us. I don't know how many of us believe that. You know, I always say that God is in control. But then you start going through things. I mean, if you sit right now and you think of where you are right now and what you're going through in life, can you really believe God's got this? That He is in control no matter what I'm facing? I always find, you know, it's the soul satisfaction in God's wisdom that He knows best. And obviously many of you know my life is turned upside down this year. But I was like, the Lord spoke to my heart and I knew, okay, Lord, this is your will. But I've always got a way of helping God. I'm like, okay, cool, I've got it. This is your will. I'm in. How about we do it like this? And I've got like a strategy. Okay, over the next 3 years, we're gonna, and the Lord's like saying tomorrow. And I'm like, no, wait. And we're gonna, this is the rollout of your will. And for this year, for me, it really came to a place of saying, not only, as Jesus prayed, Lord, your will be done. So not only God's will, but His way, which sometimes doesn't always suit us, and His timing, which often never suits us, because we either want it tomorrow, or in my case, I wanted it 3 years' time, and He wanted it tomorrow. So it's really learning to submit to that. So how do we acquire contentment? Number one, Jesus has to be the focus. If you remember nothing else I say today, Jesus. Trust and pursue the person of Jesus. This is the only secret to be contentment. And let's be honest for a moment. For how many of us is Jesus really the focus, as opposed to our need for significance and our need for companionship and recognition and just accumulation of things? And we see this evident in our prayer lives and our conversations. I just want to read something that author Rob Cuban talks about on contentment based on conviction. I think it's really beautiful. It says, the Bible calls us to allow our convictions, not our circumstances, to govern our sense of contentment. True biblical contentment is a conviction that Christ's power, His purpose, and His provision is sufficient for every circumstance. We are to learn how to walk through all kinds of adversity, believing in and experiencing Christ's sufficiency. We have to choose to rest on God's good promises despite what may be going on in our lives. True contentment comes from trusting Christ and having faith that in Him you will have everything you need. Christ is sufficient and His promises are enough. So we are called to trust Jesus' promises over our perceptions and over the devil's deceptions. Number 2, being present now. I think this was something for me that I had to practice it last year, but I learned this many years ago. I lost my mom 25 years ago. And I just realized, we know this, but I think more than ever, I just realized we don't know what tomorrow holds. I don't know what today holds. I don't know anything. All I have is this moment now. So even right now, all I have is this moment with you right now. And so often we don't appreciate the present, because your present is really a gift from God. Literally the seeds that he puts in your hands now to sow for your future. I'm actually going to show you a picture of my garden that I used to live in 2 months ago. Ta-da-da! Okay, the Garden of Eden, as many of you know, where God lives, in Eden Vale. I'll just put that out there before everyone sends emails. But yes, beautiful, my happy place, my woosa place. And as you know, Greg and I bought a beautiful home, which we are so, so grateful for, and it's amazing. But so 6 weeks ago, this was our new garden. So as you can see, you get 0 and then you get less than 0, which is pretty much that. But at that time, just as we have that same decision in our lives, at that time, we could choose. We had the seeds, and I had the many generous people in the church who gave me plants and gave me vouchers for nurseries. And we were like, this is it, we are garden. I was like, we don't care about food, we don't care about curtains, we don't care about anything. We need a garden. And we started sowing the seeds, and thanks to the help of a lot of people, this is our garden. So 6 weeks. It's amazing. And there was help from a lot of people. So, oh, yes. Don't know how that got there. This is the gardener. He's done an amazing job. You're blushing. I didn't do that. I didn't do that. Anyway, but I see life is like a long-distance race. And don't we wish, I always just wish that there was some guy on the side, with a board that said 5 laps to go, and you could yes, okay, 5 laps, and then 3 laps, and you're thinking, I know where I am along my race, I've got 3 laps left, I can pace myself and go for it. And then that day, when he lifts up the 1, and this is it. This is my last lap. I've got 1 lap left to go. It wouldn't matter how exhausted you are, how tired, how frustrated or irritated, you would run that lap with all your heart. And that's really how we need to live life. Don't waste your life. Don't take it for granted. Life is your greatest commodity. It is valuable and it is limited. Living in the present is only possible when we appreciate and steward the time God gives us. So how do we appreciate the value of time? We need to see it as a never again to be experienced commodity. And I just want to say that again. Never again to be experienced commodity. And this includes those moments punctuated by both joy and pain. And for many of us who've lost a loved one to a terminal disease, we know towards the end it's really difficult, those last few weeks. And with my dad, he was in and out of consciousness, and Lawrence is here, and Auntie Audrey, and to the end, there was a moment that he was with us, and he just took my hand the one day, and he just said, "Oh, my girl," he said, "I'm not dead. but I'm not alive either. I'm somewhere in between. And it just broke my heart. And I said to the Lord, like, I don't know. I don't know how to live here. I don't know how to see him in this. I don't know how to walk this, And just once again, I was reminded of this, that I had this moment with him now. And it was a privilege, even when there's pain, even when there was joy, that I had that moment, the privilege of being with him. And I know today all I would want is more of those moments. Okay, number 3, your thought life, the secret place where nobody but God sees. So our thought life affects our attitude and our hearts. So like your body, what you put in, what you eat, the exercise you do either makes you a lean, mean dream machine, and he's not watching me, or that's one of the two. But basically, you choose what you think. Martin Luther says, you can't stop a bird flying over your head, but you can stop it from nesting in your hair. And I know this year, which Debbie will vouch for, I really battled with my thoughts. There was this new journey ahead, and there were there were all these challenges that I was faced with. And I had all these voices. I had all these voices in my head, everybody's voices and expectations and requirements. I had my own voice of insecurity. I had God's voice. I had the enemy's voice, and my head was spinning. But the problem was I started engaging in these thoughts, and we really don't realize the power of our thoughts. And the more I thought about them and thought, oh, what does it mean? What is it saying? Where does it come from? These thoughts started becoming, I believed them, and they started becoming my reality. And the problem with that is I started seeing myself through these thoughts. In other words, they become this lens that you start looking at yourself in. And what they can do is they can imprison you and wreck you from actually walking in what God has for you. And that's why Paul clearly says to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, to think on those things that are pure and holy and of good report, because as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Our behavior flows from our thoughts. What we think is what we become. Isaiah 26:3 says, you keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. Okay, number 4, thankfulness, to rejoice always. Living a life of gratitude is critical. Thank him for what you have. We're always seeing what we don't have. Thank him for what you have. And remember his faithfulness, as Tian sang this morning. We look back at our lives and we just see he was faithful. He carried me through that. He was faithful. I got through that. He will be faithful today, and he will continue to be faithful in your life. And as we look at him, we see how small our problems become. He not only gives us peace and joy, he is our peace and joy. Number 5, my last point, but I really want to focus on this because this is so important, is to keep your heart pure. Don't become contaminated by life. Don't allow bitterness or resentment to creep in. So when you're hanging on the side of the boat and your family has disowned you, and your friends' heads are down in the water, and not even God can hear you, you feel abandoned by everybody, and you feel like you're drifting out at sea, can you keep your heart pure? Truthfully, life doesn't always go according to plan. Our dreams don't always come true. Our goals are not always met. But can we be joyful and satisfied and expectant even when it's hard, even when we're living in limbo? Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And I love this. Solomon, the cleverest dude ever, said this, and he said a lot of clever stuff. But here he's saying, if you didn't hear me on anything else, above all else, above everything I've said to you, guard your heart. Why? Because everything, not some things, everything you do flows from it. And the problem is when we allow ourselves to be contaminated by the experiences and the hardships of life or the limbo, we become sick inside. And it's like a terminal disease. Sometimes you don't know it's there until it's actually too late and it's restricted you in what God has for you. So as much as we fight for contentment, we need to fight against discontentment. So I just want to end with 4 easy to recognize strategies that the enemy uses to derail us. And it's guilt, anger, greed, and jealousy. So what does guilt say? Guilt says, I owe you. I did something to you, I took something from you, I hurt you. So what we do with that is it creates these walls of authenticity and secrecy, and we start distancing ourselves either from that person or from that relationship, because secrets actually suck the life out of us. So how do we deal with guilt? We know this, we just don't always practice it. We confess. We confess not only to God, but we confess to the person that we've hurt, or to a trusted friend as well. And what it can often do is it results in initial damage, but the only way to bring true reconciliation is to actually confess. The second one is anger. So anger says, you owe me. You took something from me, or you hurt me. Either you pay me back, or I pay you back, or I hold it over you and anyone that reminds me of you in this situation. So anger is really dangerous because anger is not isolated. Anger is mobile. It creeps and seeps into all other relationships. I worked with a girl many jobs ago, and her first husband had cheated on her, and her second husband was just amazing. But he'd always joke with us, and he'd say, if I can get my hands on that first husband, because he says, I'm paying the price of what he did in her life. So what she had done is obviously that distrust and the hurt and the bitterness had seeped into other relationships. So anger we must deal with and deal with quickly. And the way to deal with anger is to forgive. Identify what was taken from you and cancel the debt. Say, you don't owe me anymore. Third point is greed. Greed says, I owe me. It's very me. Everything, it's all for my consumption. My heart goes out, but often my money or my time or my energy doesn't follow. And people will feel that they're competing with our stuff. So the greatest skill in life is actually not accumulation, but it's contentment. How do we deal with greed? We give. And we give what's big to us. For some people, maybe you've got a lot of money, so writing out a check is easy. But you give what's big to you. Don't allow yourself to be controlled by whether it's possessions, the flesh, or emotions. Giving brings freedom. And the last one is jealousy or envy or covetousness. And this says life owes me. Somebody got what I deserve. And the problem with this is that we can start secretly enjoying someone else's loss or someone else's failure. And if you look at this one more, closely, you actually see that not only do we believe that life owes us, we believe that God owes us. We believe I got a raw deal. Why did he get? Why did she get? Why not me? And how do we deal with this one? So when you see this in your life, when you feel it, address it immediately. Don't allow this to take root in your heart. We celebrate, and we celebrate what God has given them. We celebrate what God has given us, and we celebrate out loud. So the next time you're at the office and John walks past and you and everybody else knows that John got that promotion that you deserve, can you say, congrats on your promotion, John? I'm so happy for you. But we need to learn to behave our way past the things that have the potential to pollute our hearts. And for me, I just really want to encourage you, comparison can be one of the greatest causes of discontentment in our lives. And for me this year, when I was faced with so many things that I felt I am so unprepared. I am so ill-equipped. I am so unqualified. And I'd start looking at people around me and seeing they have what it takes, and I'm not enough. And before you know it, this thing can hold you. And I had to go to the Lord and say, "What were you thinking?" Like, really? But comparison is dangerous. And it took me to a place of going to the Lord, because I was also surrounded by expectations from people, family, the church, and probably my own expectations were the worst. But going to the Lord and saying, "You know what? I am yours. I'm yours. I'm going to run the race that you have called me to do, called me to run, my race. I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm not going to step into anybody else's lane and look what she's doing, look what he's doing, I can't, da, da, da. I'm going to run my race, because one day I have that incredible privilege of standing before my Lord and my Savior and my King and giving an account for my life and how I've run the race that He's called me to run." So play the cards that you've been dealt. We look at our cards and it's like a 3 and a 7 and a 9, and in my case, 3 jokers, and you're like, what did I do with this? And you look at your friend and it's like Jack, Queen, King, Ace, whatever, and you're like, royal flush. I Googled it. I think that's right. Whatever. But you never know what your next card is. And in my own life, I was like, this is my life. Oh, it is what it is. It's mapped out to be like this. And you pick up that next card, where God's got that card of the suddenlies and the unexpected, and you don't know how your life can turn around. So just play the cards that He's dealt. So in conclusion, I am finished. Hallelujah. Good news. So the theme for this morning is living in limbo. As demonstrated, you can't bring the season closer. You can't shorten it by yourself, but you can make it last longer than it should. So you have 2 possible choices. You can either get stuck there, you can stand still in that place, but then you risk your heart to that contamination, your heart and your soul and your mind. Or, as Paul said, I press in to know Him, for whose sake I have lost all things. So I pray today that you learn the secret of this contentment, which is the only way to live well in limbo, as true contentment is only found in the person and the ministry of Jesus, full stop. So may the cry of our hearts be, Lord, where you are, there I will be, and where you lead, there I will follow. And as John Piper always says, a statement he makes, which I think really summarizes our whole desire to live in contentment in order to usher in the wind of God's next season for our lives. And it's this, that God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in Him.